Today's video is brought to you by AlmostHeaven.com. Handcrafting at-home saunas since 1977. Want better sleep, less stress, and faster recovery? Now's the perfect time. Shop saunas, cold plunges, hybrids, and accessories. Use our exclusive code at checkout to save 5%. Link below.
Bo, today's topic is very personal. It becomes personal when we talk about vulnerability. And I'm recalling a story that you and I both experienced at our Timex Multisport team camp earlier this year, where we had a team member talk about something very personal to her, and that was an eating disorder and how she had struggled through that. And you could hear a pin drop in that room that day, and there was something about her sharing her story that, without knowing her previously, made me feel closer to her. And I think this vulnerability topic is spot on closing the gap between what we know and what we don't know about someone in our life.
Dave, without a doubt, and it's very appropriate that you would start the conversation on those particular terms, because without question, I felt that very same thing. And this is one of our newer teammates, one that I didn't know a whole lot about. But after her sharing her story, I felt like I had known her my entire life. So that's a good lead in addressing the concept of vulnerability. We as human beings tend to have a hard time with letting the world know who we really are. In a world that promotes perfection, essentially, in talent, in skills, in no flaws whatsoever, it's easy to get caught up in self-promotion and ultimately to the point of saying and doing things that aren't really us, out of pressure to perform, out of pressure to be what the world tells us we need to be. And all of that is essentially fake. And it can only last so long until our true self is dying to come out, and then putting on that front, that facade, if you will, becomes literally exhausting, and it can only hold on for so long. And I think this is particularly tough for us as men, this whole concept of vulnerability. Let me just give you an example. So the night before last, I was reading a book to my 3-month-old boys, Tro and Charlie, and it was a Mother Goose nursery rhyme, and it got to the point where it said, "What are little boys made out of?" And little boys are made out of snaps and snails and puppy dog tails. Snaps and snails and puppy dog tails. Okay, and then very quickly it said, "And what are little girls made out of? Sugar and spice and all things nice." Sugar and spice and all things nice. So you think about the dual capacity of those two very early nursery rhymes, because those are one of the first things that we hear is snaps and snails and puppy dog tails tend to give us the impression that guys have to be tough, that we have to be impenetrable, that we have to be a rock when it comes to emotion, where it's a little bit more socially acceptable for girls to be soft, warm, cozy. And, I think women in general have an easier time showing and expressing their emotions than we do as men. But it's no less important for us to be able to share the real story. Now, talking about our time together at multi-sport camp every spring, I'm not sure if you remember, but 2 years prior, when you and I met for the first time, you were actually interviewing me with my own personal story, and mine's a little bit extreme. It has to do with a near-death experience. I won't get into it now, but ultimately now I live with an external appliance that was left in place after my surgery. I have what's called an ileostomy, which serves the purpose of a large intestine, and that sits on the outside of my skin. So that's really hard for me to hide. So vulnerability for me post that life-saving surgery 10 years ago has been a little bit easier. And of course, I've built my entire platform around it now, in that my whole mission is that perfection is not the goal of life. And no matter how hard I try to be, there's no way that I can ever be, literally by looking at me. you can see that I'm imperfect. But that imperfection has given me the prime opportunity to expose myself for who I really am. And the relationships that I've built, you being a prime example, are authentic, they're genuine, and they're sincere because you know that I have nothing to hide. Life is too hard to do by yourself. We all need advocates. We all need friends. We all need champions that are supporting us as we go. What's the good of having an inner circle if our inner circles don't know who we really are?
And I think great relationships are built on things, which is part of the same word, um, experiences that are relatable. At least you can, I don't know, sympathize and empathize with the person you're hearing the story from, and someone who has to go through a struggle. We all have our degrees of struggle, and whether it was the lady who was talking about an eating disorder and having to overcome that, or the fact of embarrassment, or feeling extremely vulnerable by having an external device on you, is something I think we all can find something to relate to, and that's where I feel this topic has something that can touch everybody, and it's perfect because we're imperfect.
No question, no question. And, relationships are the only thing that truly last forever in a lifetime. And I bet if I asked you right now who the most significant person in your life is or has been, I know I've heard you mention in the past your high school football coach. At some point, he exposed himself to you, even as a teenager, on the true him, who he really was, what he stood for. And you saw eye to eye in his priorities and his values. And that connection was made. And although you all might not be in regular contact today, if you called him, there would be no doubt within a matter of minutes, hours, days, and he would call you back and you could actually reunite with him based on the relationship that you built. I feel the very same way about you. I could book a flight to Spokane today and you would receive me with open arms, even though we only get to see each other twice or three times a year. It's the relationship that we've been able to build because, Dave, you know the true me. And because I, Bo, know the true you, that's because we are choosing not to hide anything. It's full disclosure because our pride, our ego is not in the picture. When you're trying to impress someone, you lead with your accomplishments, with your success, your race results, the amount of money you've made, the number of Facebook or Twitter followers you have. That's status. Whereas you're truly trying to connect with someone, you practice empathy. And I heard you mention empathy a few minutes ago, but my favorite definition as a lead-in to relationship building of empathy is making the effort to understand someone's needs and then taking action, which is far different than sympathy. Sympathy expresses condolences, but does nothing to improve the matter. Whereas empathy makes that effort to understand the current situation and then takes action to correct that or to do something about it. Empathy is the foundation for solid relationships because you have proven to this person that you are willing to put your own interests, your own objectives on hold for the greater good, for the greater benefit of connecting, helping, doing whatever you can to advance and deepen that relationship. All of it's based on vulnerability.
And how selectable do we have to be with these moments of vulnerability? Because there are certain circles that it would be appropriate, or you feel, okay, I'm in a trust tree, so to speak. How do you find those, and how do you pick those moments, or what situations would allow you to express vulnerability?
It's funny, Dave, as you were mentioning that question, the first thought that came to my mind is these these back alley evangelists that wear sandwich boards that just yell at people in public crowds. You need to confess, you're going to hell if you don't. Well, and that is one of the most off-putting ways to present the gospel that I can possibly think of, because there's no relationship there. There's no basis for making statements like that. And I use that example is because we don't want to go out on the street today and project our imperfection into a crowd of busy passersby. In a time where your message is not easily digestible, you do not want to force something on someone until they're in a capacity to receive it. And so, you mentioned earlier about relationships, is that it becomes easier to reveal your own imperfection when you feel that the person you're connecting with is being vulnerable with you. So good opportunities for these would be in smaller settings, in triathlon club meetings, in churches, in fantasy football leagues, in neighborhood association gathering meetings, groups where there are already somewhat established relationships, maybe not deep, but there has to be a desire on your part to want to deepen the relationship that's already in place, because we all have surface level relationships where we're just kind of on a, hey, how you doing? I'm fine. How you doing? I'm fine. That's not real, but it's certainly more than you would have to go with a stranger in an elevator. So I'd say there's a fine line between exposing yourself in the act of being vulnerable with the right people at the right times, because given the right opportunity, you can truly take your casual relationships to that next level where you can absolutely trust and to depend on them, because they know that you are real, that you are authentic, and that you're not scared to open up on who the real you really is.
And I think there's a fine line when we talk about the world of our professional world. Let's say you're talking to an authority figure, or you're the person that you have to report to. There is an opportunity there, but I'm wondering, when do you cross that line, asking possibly for advice to someone who you aspire to be like in your circle? So if it's, say for me, it's, I don't know, let's say go back a few years to a news director, and I say, I really want to become better at what I do. I don't feel like I'm up to par right now, and I'm missing something. I need your help. Right there shows some vulnerability, but also maybe fear or lack of confidence. But there's the opportunity for that person to advise you and help you get better. So I kind of want to, if there's a chance, to talk about the work environment.
Absolutely. And I think there's a parallel to the conversation we had last week about the unknown. And let's just use your work life example. And you're approaching someone who is established in your field that you too desire to mimic, to follow in their footsteps. And you lead with the question, can you help me? Absolutely. That is opening yourself up to vulnerability. And in the fear of the unknown, because you don't know how that person's going to respond, you are taking a risk. And you remember what we said about every risk. The reason we take risk is for the promise of a reward. Now, we don't stop taking risks if we do not immediately experience a reward. And in this particular case, this gentleman you're approaching in the media world could say, are you kidding? I don't have time for you. Don't call me again. And that very well could happen. So that's a risk you took that did not result in a reward. Should you stop asking? Absolutely not. Because the more you ask, the easier it becomes, irregardless of the outcome. So the unknown is going to be the outcome, that which we cannot control. I can only control the story I tell you about me, not the way you react. Because when I first showed you my external appliance, you could have said, whoa, TMI short for too much information. I did not need to know that, and then distance yourself from me, and we may not have that opportunity. And there are people in my life that had provided that response. Life's too short to stop trying when I'm met with a response other than what I would have liked. There are some people out there that are going to prefer the comfort and the security of being unknown in a predictable environment where they do not have to open themselves up, where they can stay closed in, where they can be on a one-way street that leads to a self-centered focus. That's not the path that I want to travel. That's not the path of vulnerability. That's the path of life is all about me. I do not need you. And I know that's not the path that you or our listeners want to take either.
How much of an open book should we be?
So, again, I think that's more of a judgment call. And again, the more you do it, the easier it becomes. Repetition leads to confidence, confidence ultimately leading to character. And the more you ask, the greater you let your guard down and down and down to where your story no longer has to be told primarily by yourself, is that you built a reputation, you built your character, and you have others who are familiar with you. My keynote address that I gave in St. Louis on Saturday to the healthcare conference, Dave, you projected that message on my behalf all over Twitter, all over Facebook. So that no longer requires me to promote myself and my story. You're doing it on my behalf because I am all about connecting with people on a deep and meaningful level. And it all requires vulnerability on the front end. So essentially, it's an investment that I made in you early on in our relationship that's paid huge dividends because now you know my story, you know what I'm trying to accomplish, and you've proven extremely valuable in helping me get that out there. So I think I can be as open as I possibly want to be now at this level, at this stage in the game, but it has built slowly over time.
This is very exciting. What you just said sparked an idea in my head that what we're doing by being vulnerable is, in a way, we're building advocates or ambassadors for our story to reinforce who we are. Not that we don't have to, but it's almost like a spokesperson. Someone's who endorsing us and endorsing our character because we've opened ourselves up to them, which is what I've kind of done for you, but it's been on a personal friendship level.
No question. And however we decide to disseminate this information to make it widely available to anyone who wants it, could you imagine the way our lives would look as if the very second question in entering into a new relationship, obviously the first being, what is your name? Rather than saying, what do you do? Which stereotypically, that's what we all do. Think of any new conversation you've ever had. You meet anybody new, what's your name? So-and-so. Oh, what do you do? So-and-so. What about if that second question is, what is your greatest regret up to this point in your life? Hi, Dave. I'm Bo. Dave, great. I'm Dave. Dave, tell me what your greatest regret is up to this point in your life. Kind of in a laughing, joking manner, but stopping to see how that question would be met. And if you actually had the courage to answer that question, imagine where a conversation would go rather than, oh, I'm a financial advisor. What do you do? Oh, well, I'm in multimedia. If I don't have any knowledge of multimedia or you have any knowledge of investment advice, the conversation ends there. But if I actually answer your question, when you say, Bo, what's your greatest regret in life? First, I share, and then you share, and then all of a sudden our conversation is all about vulnerability. Because the one thing that we all have in common as human beings is our imperfection. And the quicker that comes out, the quicker the real relationship can start to be built.
Lots of nuggets of gold there in this conversation about vulnerability, just dripping from the ceiling. This is some great stuff. I don't know. I think that might be a good place to end, Bo.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's stop it while it's hot.
Looking for a great at-home sauna at a great price? Get 5% off any indoor or outdoor sauna, cold plunge, or infrared sauna from Almost Heaven with my discount code DAVE, 5% off at checkout. For over 40 years, Almost Heaven saunas have been trusted as the top American home sauna manufacturer. Almost Heaven saunas deliver high-quality products and firmly stands behind the holistic benefits the sauna brings to your mind and your body. Again, get 5% off any order with my discount code DAVE, 5% off at almostheaven.com. There's also a direct link below this video.